Unsure of the order in which you are watching these, but this is the fourth video for the Section 3 review. This one is going to be walking through a problem on the calculation of unemployment rate and the various other components. It's a few things that I want to make sure that you're aware of. And this is Section 3, page 124. This is using the data from the Tackle the Test multiple choice. Vocabulary-wise, you need to make sure you know that the labor force participation rate is the labor force divided by population age 16 plus. So I went out of order, but I want to go through and what these terms are. Population 16 plus is just the number of people that we think could be part of the labor force. Now, it makes some assumptions that they're not disabled, that they're not retired or unable to work, but it's assuming that everyone over 16 plus, given the right circumstances, could be a part of the labor force. And labor force participation rate is those people that are working now, are part of the labor force. Well, then it helps to know that the labor force is equal to total people that are employed. And now remember, employed is part-time or full-time. So if you're employed, if you work 1 hour a week, if you work 30 hours a week, we're going to say you're employed, plus unemployed, which is the harder one to understand, which is people that are 16 plus, able and willing to work. So you're going to take the labor force, those people that are either working or trying to work, and divide that by the population age 16 plus. That gives you labor force participation rate. So labor force then in the situation above is 100,000 because they state it. We're actually going to use that to calculate unemployed because that's the missing variable. But the labor force participation rate is then 100,000 over the total total people 16 over, which is going to be that, 200,000, which gives us 0.5 or 50%. Unemployed workers, using the equation above, if labor force is employed plus unemployed, and we know it's 100,000, we know that 70,000 are full-time, 20,000 are part-time. We know that this plus the unemployed is going to equal the labor force, which is 100,000. So then when we subtract 90 from each side, we know that the unemployed is 10,000. Unemployment rate is then unemployed, the number of people in a society that are unemployed, and we're going to divide that by labor force, and that's going to give us 10,000 over 100,000, which is the total number of people employed plus unemployed, which gives us 10%. Now the common mistake here is that people either do unemployed over total population or do unemployed over employed. It's unemployed over the labor force, which is only unemployed plus employed. Now, totally changing course here. We talk about types of categories of unemployment. And we say that the unemployment rate, so we just figured out this rate of 10%. So we say the unemployment rate, which is this number as a percentage, is equal to the number of people that are frictionally unemployed. And remember, frictional unemployment are people that just have natural job loss or lack of jobs. For example, if you graduate college and are looking for a job, you are unemployed because you are someone who's of age and able and willing, but you haven't found a job yet. So you're frictionally unemployed. That's something that just happens. If you're at a job and you're miserable and you quit, or you get let go for various reasons and you're trying to find another job, you'd be considered frictionally unemployed. So frictional unemployment plus structural unemployment. Remember, structural unemployment are those people that lose a job because of the change in a business's structure. If a robot is better than you and you lose your job, you're structurally unemployed. If the job itself moves to a different state, you're structurally unemployed. If changes in wages cause the job to hire less people, you'd be considered structurally unemployed. And then we say that frictional plus structural is part of the natural rate, and this is the rate that's just natural in a society because things happen. And then you add to that cyclical unemployment, and cyclical unemployment is caused by the up and downs of the economy, the ups and downs of the economy. This is driven by the economic cycle. This is not natural. So we take the natural rate, we add the cyclical rate to get the unemployment rate. So if we know the unemployment rate is 10, if we know the natural rate is 7, then we know the cyclical rate must be 3. Okay, reusing the same data. Now we're going to change the scenario. Now we're going to say that there was a raise in minimum wage, and this caused 20% of people in society. These are people who are just not willing to work. All of a sudden they go, oh, minimum wage went up, we want to work. So now they enter the labor force. So now we're going to say we had 100,000 people who weren't part of the labor force, and to go through that calculation, it's simply population minus labor force, which just happens to be symmetrical there. But we take that 100,000. We now said 20% of those are entering the labor force, so we have an additional 20,000, which will give us 100. Of the past, don't worry about this 100. 100 was the old labor force. We added 20,000. We have a new labor force of 120, which gives us a labor force participation rate. And guys, please feel free to pause this at any time to do the work ahead of me. So the labor force participation rate is now 120 over 200, which are still our population. These people didn't just get invented, which gives us 0.6 or 60%. Unemployed workers was 10, so our labor force 120. Of that 120, we still only had 90 working, so 120 plus 90, or minus 90, 120 minus 90 is we have 30,000 unemployed workers, which that 30,000, now the labor force ballooned up to 120. We now have an unemployment rate of 25%. Now, for those of you that listened in class on when we went over this is a bad question, because unemployment that is caused by a change in wages, mandatory wages, such as minimum wage, such as negotiated labor through unions, is structural unemployment. So I said the natural unemployment rate was 7%, but we had this huge change. That change would have actually impacted the natural rate. But using this data, if unemployment is now 25%, if the natural rate somehow was 7%, which I just stated wouldn't be correct factually, but we can use it for this, then we know that the missing amount, the cyclical amount, has to be the difference, which the difference in this case would be 18%. And that is the information, the necessary calculations to calculate data with unemployment. Now, I do want to remind you, in the textbook, in the modules, where they talk about discouraged workers, they talk about marginally attached workers, they talk about underemployment. That's information about why the unemployment rate is not always accurate. Because if someone's a discouraged worker who just isn't part of the labor force, that actually makes the unemployment rate seem lower than it should be, because those people probably should be working. Same thing with someone, and remember, discouraged workers, because of the economy, marginally attached, you just kind of become miserable or don't want to work. So those are people that are kind of skewing the data, throwing the data off because they're not part of the labor force, but they could be. And then the underemployed is someone that is part of the labor force, is employed, but should be doing something better or more significant for the economy. All right, that is it with the module or the information on 124. I would make sure that you pay attention to vocabulary, you pay attention to multiple choice for module 12 on page 124 to clear up any misconceptions.